A decade ago, when a census in the UK revealed a demographic shift in the country, and particularly in its capital London, the then mayor of the city remarked that it was a major leap towards London becoming an international city. People who pointed out issues with such a statement were labeled racist and xenophobes. These critics committed a grave sin by questioning one of the most sacred beliefs of the globalized world, diversity. Interestingly, we Indians have been familiar with the political ideology of diversity for a much longer time than the Europeans. Back in the 1940s, when the then Congress leader Jawaharlal Nehru elaborated on the nation's unity despite stark diversity, the concept was not much talked about in the West. However, one can assert that in a post Cold War world, globalization enabled it to be the foremost value that determined how progressive a society and its state are. And its most visible example is the European Union's adoption of the phrase United in Diversity as its motto in the year 2000. But what actually constitutes diversity? And is it really desirable? Welcome to the new episode of Bookmark. Today we are going to talk about the book titled On Diversity, The Eclipse of Individual in a Global Era by historian and professor at UCLA, Russell Jacoby.
Adarsh, you mentioned in your opening statement that the critics had committed a grave sin by questioning one of the most fundamental beliefs of the global world order, which is diversity. Why do you think that is the case?
Okay, so diversity is one word that we hear almost everywhere, right from the selection of cabinet of a government, where they mention that so XYZ people are from different background, different social background, or a different political background, or whatever. Similarly, we hear the term in corporate, where almost every major MNC brags about it, that how diverse they are, how accommodating they are of people of different gender, different sexual orientation, different races, and also different religions, and so on and so forth. Similarly, even in classrooms, I'm not talking about reservations. I'm talking about the diversity kind of selection. Like IIMs talk about that we have diverse classrooms. That there is no gender imbalance that we actually see in IITs, where there's IITs have often been labeled as male-dominated places. Similarly, IIMs say that, unlike that, IIMs say that we are a fairly equal gendered classrooms. So diversity is something that if you question in today's time, you'll be easily labeled as a racist, or that you have hatred towards people coming from different social backgrounds sitting with you.
Right.
There's a backdrop to it, that is the world wars, the 10th, 20th century wars that have happened, because historians, rightly or not, doesn't matter, have reduced the entire conflict to the conflict of ethnicities. Basically, one ethnic superiority trying to dominate over the world. Let's say the Nazis have been trying to dominate across the Europe and so on and so forth. Similarly, Japanese in the Asia. So, in order to reduce the clash between ethnicities, the idea is that if we start accommodating everyone, if we start saying that you should be tolerant of the other, and we value this concept of diversity, the conflicts will reduce, and the human world will move to a better place, to a better side of the humanity, unlike the regressing down to the conflicts of the last centuries or medieval ages. So, therefore, the idea of diversity is very sacred in today's time.
Right. When the author, in the very first chapter, he starts with, the first chapter is called The Myth of Diversity. And he starts with a quote, which is not really a quote, but he has spotted this on a slogan on some cheap t-shirt in a beach in Los Angeles.
Correct.
And the slogan is, I am an individual like everyone else. So I think that statement, that quote that he's used here is very, very powerful in how it reflects the whole theme of this book.
Right.
Which is to say that the individuals, what he's trying to say in the book is that the individuals are not getting increasingly alike.
Correct.
While there are differences between groups that are touted as diversity. But the fundamental question that he asks is that if individuals are getting alike and groups are being touted as diverse, then then finally, what really is the difference? So interesting that you make this point about how to accommodate various ethnicities and different cultures working together in the globalized world order because it is good for the economy and other such constraints. So because of that, there is a pressure on everyone to be accommodative to people who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who don't live like you. That's basically the idea. But the paradox that the author very clearly reflects in the book is that while doing so, you are making these same people increasingly like each other. So you are killing diversity while you are pandering to it at a ideological level.
I mean, one example is that we are talking in English.
Correct. Absolutely.
Coming from different backgrounds, we are speaking in English. We are speaking to a globalized audience. Similarly, they mentioned that the speech is same, the kind of clothes that people wear are same across the globe, or they want to imitate that kind of clothing. There's a certain kind of dresses that is seen as superior. So you can see across the corporates they are wearing the same kind of attire. Similarly, he also goes on to mention that the even species kind on a biodiversity level, the similarity is emerging. We'll go into that point later. But the point is that there is an imposition of monoculture, what he's trying to assert, in the name of diversity. Earlier, the monoculture were asserted in order to say that we want to make a superior race or we want to have a superior grouping. Like in Turkey, the hats, the traditional hat that I guess we nowadays see is that ice cream sellers wearing. That hat was outlawed in 1925 because it was seen as inferior. I guess it was done by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. So he wanted the people of Turkey to imitate the Europeans in terms of their dressing so that they can be superior. Similarly, there is another example of a German king, sorry, a Prussian king, who said that we should all speak French to his people because supposedly German was seen as the language of barbarians. So they wanted to imitate a higher culture, and uh, in the name of becoming like them. Similarly, a similar thing is going on here, but in the name of diversity. That we are coming from a different background, we are assimilating into one culture, one monoculture, which is more or less the American culture right now.
Correct.
Which has been propped up by their success in economic success, market, and their sheer military power, or we can say their global power.
Yeah,
both in
even the
terms of
soft power. Yeah, even the soft
power, both
yes.
the hard and soft power has enabled that the global American culture succeeds, and people from different background assimilate themselves into it. Another example is that even if you see in films, people coming from different backgrounds, let's say different races in American films, they want to imitate a similar kind of roles.
Right.
They want to be a Superman, they want to be a Captain America.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they want to be that person, but in a different name.
Correct.
They are not saying that our background were inferior or we come from a inferior place where there is no high culture. But they are saying that we are coming because we value diversity, but we want the same thing that has been given to everyone else, the same kind of success. So the monoculture is quite visible, what that author points out.
Right. And I would just like to, for clarity of the audience, I would just like to quote him directly in one of the chapters. I think it's the first chapter itself where he raises these foundational questions. And the quote goes, "How much do groups diverge if the individuals that constitute them resemble each other? Moreover, how distinct are these groups if they share identical aims?"
Correct.
Because everyone, and we've been discussing, this is almost, it's uncanny how this is turning out into a series. Let me assure the audience that this is not pre-planned. But the first two books that we discussed in this new season, we started with meritocracy, tyranny of merit, and then we went to genetic lottery. And throughout this, the consistent theme has been about what happens in a society where everyone is allowed to do everything, and there is a universal. There's a
Interestingly, everyone wants to do same thing. That everything is the same thing.
everything is the same, and there is a competition happening between every member of society. So there is one
Common
direction, in which the race is being planned, and this race is running, and then everything else, all the politics around it, and the noble corrective efforts are also in that same paradigm. So, so this is every single book has made this point so far. Now, the book, I mean, the author in his various in the different chapters, he seems to suggest that diversity is a real thing, right, and it's very desirable. But how diversity is talked about these days is hugely problematic. So first, what is your idea of why is diversity important in the first place?
So, interestingly, he has used two terms here. Even the European Union's motto, the original motto is in Latin, and it uses the word variety, which is, when translated in English, becomes diversity. Now, he has mentioned that nature plays itself in variety. As we have just discussed in that previous episode on genetic lottery, that even genes have a variety. No two people have a similar genetic framework, and that too runs into some 70 trillion. Similarly, nature plays out in variety. There have been so many species, plants, animals, whatever. Similarly, the complete, what do you call that, development of a human being has to do with something with variety. If he encounters different kind of situation, if he encounters different kind of setups in his life, both private, personal, or public life, then only his mind can grow to a certain level, which can be called a developed or a civilized brain, from a very primitive to an advanced stage, as the journey of man has evolved over the course of time. That's why the value of variety is so much, because nature offers it to you. When you reduce it to one single culture, the development stagnates.
Right.
So essentially, the point is that we must respect diversity in this context.
Right. So it's basically saying that, I mean, every culture has certain values that they optimize.
Right.
So if the whole earth is populated by people of the same culture, although superficially that makes no difference, but what it does is that it optimizes only a few values. In this case, it is the enlightenment values of liberty, fraternity, and equality. And by optimizing those values, it leaves society as such vulnerable to other kinds of serious crises, which it is disarmed against, right? So if you are only optimizing equality, then you are naturally giving up on diversity. And life as such is, I mean, especially even individually and collectively as well, life is full of diverse challenges. It's an axiom actually, that life is full of diverse challenges, and if you don't have enough people who think differently about the same thing, then you might come to a situation where no one has an answer to a problem. And I think that we are in an era where there are so many problems that no one has an answer to, and it seems to stem from this lack of diversity in culture and thinking.
But interestingly, diversity itself has become a value which stagnates that diversity.
Correct.
Because what entails diversity, what kind of freedom or what kind of differences are desirable, has also been discussed in details. Only the differences where freedom is valued, individual freedom, individual liberty, that is desirable. Any culture which tries to protect itself or says that we want to live in isolation, that is something that is not desirable. No matter, their isolation can only enable diversity, because if they get assimilated, the mightier force, they'll succumb to the mightier force over the course of time.
Yes.
One example in the book is given of a Jewish community in USA.
The Amish.
Not the Amish, no, the Jewish.
Oh, okay.
So they said that within their community, they refuse to speak in English, because they say that it is kind of an sort of an evil force that will engulf their identity. And it is because, and I mean, there were some notions that it is that they have succumbed to these evil forces, that they were punished in last centuries and all.
Right.
These kind of notions are still prevalent in some micro community among the Jews, some Orthodox micro community. But the point is that if you ask them to open up their houses for you, you are eventually going to decimate their uniqueness over the course of time. That is what they are paranoid about.
Right.
So their paranoia also stems out of the larger force that they are facing, because there's a clash going on.
Correct. No. So I take the point about diversity being used in this way, and diversity, the whole rhetoric of diversity being against diversity itself, killing diversity. But this is, I think, a semantic confusion, and also because of the fact that in this Western paradigm, an individual is seen as a complete unit in itself. And so you say that, oh, we will maximize. So this is a huge paradox, I think, that we will maximize individual liberty. And by maximizing individual liberty, you are killing the collective. Because there is no protective cushion of the collective, all individuals start becoming the same.
Correct.
So there is somewhere there has to be a balance between the individual and the collective for diversity to really thrive.
Right.
And the other example that you mentioned about people who are not willing to sign up on the this modern project, or let's say they don't want to speak English, it's a very legitimate response to the hegemony of this monoculture of the globalized world order. And a lot of tribes, I suppose, in India also would feel threatened, like the tribe in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, who
would not want to.
they just simply kill people who come close by. I think it's a fair strategy. But this so this balance between the individual and the community, where do you place the optimization?
Correct.
Right? How do you maximize freedom so that it does not kill collective or the individual aspirations for diversity? I think that is the question that is implicitly asked. He does not explicitly ask this question, but that is what he's getting
That
at.
is also a point about identities. What is an identity of an individual? So there are macro identities of a nation, that you're a citizen of a XYZ nation. Then you belong to a certain community. Then you belong to a family. Then you belong to a certain lineage. So which identity actually is the what do you call that, building block of the diversity?
Correct.
Is what matters here.
Yeah. And one more point that he makes about these the communities who resist this monoculturalization is that they never stand in queue and say that we are underrepresented anywhere.
Correct.
Because they're more concerned about preserving their own culture and their own way of life than they are about enrolling in this race of modernity. So because of that, they're not part of these diversity forums and people saying that we also want equal representation. And I was also thinking about this in a different way, and this is the most simplistic example to make one understand about what this is getting at, because this is a paradox and difficult to grasp. That men and women biologically are different, right? But now there is a very insidious pressure on the two genders to start looking like each other, to start behaving like each other, to start aspiring like each other. Everything, from psychological to the physical, outermost physical trait. There is a convergence between men and women. And so you are basically killing biological expression of diversity in the service of the ideological. And what is the ideological? Which is to say that, oh, women and men should, work together and there should be equality, and why should women not be part of the workforce? Because as soon as they get into the workforce, uh, they are accepting conditions that were traditionally meant for men. And by that, they will necessarily have to start behaving more like men.
Yeah.
And after 100 years or after a few decades of this pressure on women, now they've started getting back, and this feminist movements have several waves of feminism has erupted, where now they are demanding men to become like them. So we've walked so far.
So far,
We've taken 10 steps. You also take 10 steps and become like us. So there is a pressure on men to become like women.
But I guess that discussion has taken a different turn with the advent of transgender activism.
They have completely hijacked the whole thing. That is a different. Let's not get into that. But I'm just saying.
But that is also an expression of diversity. Like in that book, we discussed it quite a while back about Gatsad's book of the parasitic mind. So the dilemma was that only, that here a person is saying that my gender expression is different on the basis of sexual orientation, on the basis of gender. So it has always been the tool for micro communities to emerge and demand for greater representation. At times they even say that uh, fake their numbers. They're just to get the major say into things. But the point is, where will you draw the line? Tomorrow some new community will come in, and this will keep on happening till the time you just let people identify as they are. I'm not just saying in terms of gender. I'm saying it can be any metric.
Correct. In fact, this reminds me. Long back, I was responding to some sympathizers of terrorists of Kashmir on Facebook, and someone said that the right to self-determinism. This phrase has been the most abused phrase in politics of today. That is self-determinism. So self-determination. So self-determination. If let's say if a people, one community in the state of Jammu and Kashmir has the right for self-determination, then where do you draw the line? Can we say that we are right now in this area of South Delhi and we want to secede from the Union of India because we want to live in our own way? So then our demand is as legitimate. Then it will keep growing narrower and narrower, and then you will have blocks within a mohalla saying that we want self-determination.
Individuals within the family.
There is no limit to it, right? So ultimately, it will come down to the individual, and that is the dark reality of the times, I think.
Right. And you were mentioning about how individuals have been thrown into a single race.
Yes.
A narrow race.
Yes.
That as you mentioned, even in the case of male and female, being biologically different, they have been put into a certain set pattern that you have to follow this.
Correct.
Like a factory lineup.
Yes.
So they are pursuing the same goal, they are pursuing the same vision, there is no difference.
Exactly.
So kind of whatever the biological difference have been there, the effort of their the social setup is to ensure that it doesn't play a role.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have the whole society being pushed to achieve the same objective, one objective, which is making money,
right,
then that pressure to make money will destroy all sorts of diversity and all kinds of culture, and there will be just one culture, that monoculture, which is the corporate culture that exists
the hustle
today.
culture.
The hustle culture. Yes. So that is going to happen, and that is inevitable, and that is happening everywhere around us. And when any form of diversity, whether it is gender diversity, there is race diversity, religion diversity, everything is about getting ahead of the other.
Right.
So this universal application of competition, that you have to compete. Right. There is no other value that is being pursued. So
it's interesting you mentioned religion, specifically when it comes to Hinduism, which is inherently diverse when it comes to practices and all. There has been a irresistible urge among people, the devotees, to imitate the other, to have equal rights as everyone. We saw that in the case of Sabrimala.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Where the tradition has been there for centuries, now suddenly there has been a demand that we want equal rights. Because there should be no discrimination, there should be no difference. Now the point is that if there is no discrimination, if there's no discrimination not in a negative sense, that's just a word.
No, discrimination has acquired a negative meaning. It is not a negative word. Yeah.
if there's no distinction, let's go ahead with that word. If there's no distinction between the two, then how will you maintain a diversity?
Yeah.
And essentially, diversity was being killed in that Sabrimala case that we mentioned.
No, interesting, because in the recent interview, a podcast that I had with Op India, I drew the parallel between uh, the caste exclusion of certain jatis and certain and the Shudra Varna from Vedadhikar, that being a very narrow, very narrow set of practices, very narrow set of rituals, very small set of texts. That's all that they are saying, that, this is only for the Brahmins to teach and for the Dvijas to learn. Okay. Rest of it is, perhaps 90% of the text, the tradition is open to everyone. And this just keep that. It is very similar to how Sabrimala is the only temple and even the only Ayyappa temple where women of that
certain age
bracket are not allowed. So, but that was made into an issue. However, due to the efforts of various people and people of Kerala themselves, the Sabrimala issue has somehow been comprehended by even outsiders. But this, because there are vested interests in maintaining this bogeyman of caste atrocities in India, therefore this Vedadhikar has not been talked about the same way. And either there is a total distortion or there is apologia saying that no, actually this does not even exist.
Correct.
So this is a reflection on how diversity is such a uncomfortable theme in our monoculture world, society, and how even people who claim that diversity is a great thing, how they are deep down inside, they are not comfortable with the idea of diversity.
Correct. There's an evident bias. Like even in book, he mentioned several scholars. Some of them actually said that what kind of diversity or what kind of culture is worthy of being saved. I can draw a parallel to the practice of Pashubali here. There are several people within the Hindu fold who said that this is not something that should be preserved. This can be junked like in the dust in history, and it is a matter of past, is a regressive practice. Let's move ahead forward, because you do not have to save every culture or every ritual or every practice. You can discard a few and still maintain diversity.
Correct.
But who decides?
Exactly. No, it's very difficult for people to get this point that there are certain practitioners, and it is their right.
Right.
You are no one to. I mean, the best that you can do is that you don't go to such a temple. You don't participate in such a practice, and that's good enough. You don't have to wag your finger at the other and tell him that this is not how it should be done. And these are basic hygiene of diversity, which is not maintained. Okay, so let's go to the further down the book in other chapters, and here he's talked about the decline of storytelling, the diminishing of the use of proverbs and various expressions, the decline of diversity in languages itself, which you briefly touched upon.
I mean, it all can be summarized into the decline of boredom. He draws a parallel between the two cultures, the European culture and the American culture. He said that what was life? Life was a long series of boredom interrupted by a few events.
Yeah.
So there people had a time for what can be labeled as leisure, where they can participate in certain activities, which they are not doing for some sort of commercial gain, which they are not doing for earning a livelihood, just for the mere survival, which they are not competing in. They're just doing it because they feel like they should do it. Kind of narrating story, kind of uh, listening to music, singing a song, composing a song, whatever it can be. But in case of the American culture of boredom, it is of anxiety. It is when the people are exhausted, exhausted after competing for a very limited resource, or maybe they think the resources are unlimited and they need to compete even harder for that. And eventually there is nothing that comes out from their leisure because they don't experience leisure. So their eventual decline will happen, and it has happened over the course of centuries. And and he quoted some 20th century scholars for this. So what was evident between these two sides of Atlantic back in 20th century is now more evident in case of India's urban and rural places. Maybe in the 90s or 2000 it was even most, the difference was starkly visible. It has been reducing now, because even you see that in tier 2, tier 3 cities, the culture, the monoculture is prevalent. Like nobody is in leisure now. At least there is boredom, there is exhaustion, there is frustration, but that kind of free, what do you call it, free time or
Yeah. I get what you're saying. You know, I used to, I've trekked a lot in my life.
right.
And I've been to the remotest parts of Himachal and Uttarakhand especially. And during the treks, I used to notice that if you ask someone merely, kitne baje hain? What is the time? The guy will come with you. He will show you around. He will also tell you about the flora and fauna.
Right.
He'll tell you the shortcuts that you should be taking, and he'll walk with you for an hour, and then he'll go back. There's so much time, and there's so much leisure at hand that a stranger comes, he's just exchanging a few words, and there's no pressure on him to. Acha, in Delhi, you ask someone a time, the time bhi nahi batayega, mujhe nahi pata, like that. So that difference is, anecdotal, but that is reflective of this difference that you're talking about. And some of the authors and scholars that he has quoted, very insightful uh, quotes. For example, Robert Paul Smith talks about boredom among kids.
Right.
And he says that we never thought the day was anything other than a whole lot of nothing, interrupted occasionally by something. Right? It's a powerful quote. But these days, kids no longer play and play by themselves, that is.
Right.
And there is a rise in organized sports. That's why. So he goes back to this thing of storytelling and the culture of storytelling, how this is dying out everywhere. There is no storytelling because there is no patience for hearing stories and telling stories.
Right.
Why that patience has eroded is because there is an anxiety, like you said, and people just don't know how to get bored, basically. Now here also there is a paradox, because while for the larger part of human history, people may have been bored for the better part of their lives. Boredom as a disease is a modern phenomenon where you have pathologized boredom because you don't know what to do with it. So you are inventing ways of getting distracted, aided by very powerful technology, and not getting bored a single minute of your life. So only when you're bored is the
You can come up with creativity.
Exactly. And what he says is that relentless information undermines the storyteller who relies on quiet and relaxation. Right. So storytelling as a placeholder for, or as an engine of culture, basically. This is how you teach children. That culture has died down because everyone is in a hurry. And then he also quotes Stefan Zweig, that he says that I cannot remember ever seeing my father run up or down a staircase, or indeed do anything in visible haste. So the thing that he's talking about here, and why he's quoting so many different people, is that he's saying that the increased pace of life has affected everyone, but especially the children. And when it affects your childhood, if it affects you in your childhood, then the capacity to tolerate diversity dies.
Correct. Correct. Basically, it impales you for the life.
Yes.
It is no longer you can actually have the patience or even kind of this accommodative nature.
Correct.
Tolerating nature for the something that you don't like or something that is not you are comfortable with.
Exactly. And you see that in everyday life, especially in the kind of work that we do, for example, that you are on social media, and the kind of hate and the kind of rage that you get just for expressing an opinion. The opinion may be worth dustbin. I don't say that everything that we say or someone says has to be correct, but it's an opinion.
Right.
you can take a difference of opinion, you can prove someone wrong, or you can learn from them,
Right.
whatever, but there is accommodation. But the kind of reactions that you see on social media that are very reflective of this theme, that people nowadays just don't know how to deal with diversity. And there are camps, there is polarization, and there is no conversation happening.
Right.
And perhaps this is because of the same thing, that a lot of these people who come to the social media now and who make these accounts on Twitter, they have
A tiring life, if you can say, because
no,
they have been
I'm
exhausted
going back to
a
the
point.
childhood.
Okay. Yeah.
That in their childhood, they've not had exposure to proper storytelling and to dealing with boredom on their own,
Right.
because they've always lived in a protected environment, or maybe under the gaze of the adults, supervised by them,
Supervised by the kid.
and they're playing by the rules all the time.
Right.
So they've never invented rules.
I mean, that brings me to this interesting thing, that the most people that have this kind of outrage are from my generation, or even 2-3 years younger than me, or 4-5 years younger than me, because this generation, that my generation and the one next to me, has actually grown in very strict supervision, very late strict supervision, that has been, every step has been told to us what to do and what not to do. You have to follow this for XYZ years of life and you'll get this and not that.
Exactly.
Even the kind of, if you want to participate in thing, then participate in order to succeed, because even formative assessments are that happens in school days. It is a sort of competition.
Yeah.
That your creativity, even if you are good at something, that you have to be best. You have to compete at national levels. You have to compete it at let's say, you forget global level, but at least a district level and all that. Compete at it and get some laurels and all awards. Then only that endeavor, or that even your hobby, is worth pursuing. If you're making something out of it,
Yes.
something that is commercially viable, something that you can use later in life.
Yeah, so something that can get you ahead in life.
Ahead in life, correct.
It's all that same metaphor of meritocracy. And the more we talk about it, the more I feel that it is. it's the
I mean, it's
greatest.
telling. The point is that
Yeah.
these 3 books, when we are reading these, find it so similar.
Yeah.
Like, because everything boils down to that one point of efficiency, like, which has, I guess, post-industrial revolution. That is what he mentions. A very interesting phrase of the industrial monoculture.
Yeah.
Dominating the organic diversity.
Correct.
Which has happened because you have aligned everyone to a similar goal, that you need to compete with the other, you need to succeed at life, because resources are limited, and if you don't make the best of it, you'll lag behind.
Right.
And there's a justification of it, that, as we talked about in the tyranny of merit, that you failed because why? Because you were lazy enough.
Correct.
You delved into that boredom, if we can say that.
Yes.
You didn't make the best out of that boredom. You didn't had any way out, or you couldn't figure out a way out.
Yeah.
Had you done that, you would have succeeded.
Yes. Certainly. And so boredom as such is the what he says here is that. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So he says that because boredom, there is no place for boredom. He goes on to describe what boredom really means. And he compares it, he makes an analogy with sleep. He says that, like in your physical life, sleep is extremely important for you to rejuvenate. Similarly, boredom is extremely important for you to become creative. You cannot be involved in activities all the time.
Correct.
And these days you just see kids being transported from one activity to another. First you go to the school, then you come back, then you go to the chess class, then you go to the cricket tuition, then you go to the physics or whatever science tuition, and then you come back, and then you'll probably have your homework to do. And this regimented lifestyle is actually killing children. That it's killing the inner
the child in it.
Yeah.
He said that childhood is a modern invention. So it has been decimated in the modernity itself.
Correct. So I mean the consistent theme in the book, I find, is one of paradox, because every topic that he's taken up, whether it is childhood, whether it is boredom, whether it is diversity itself, which is everywhere there are these two layers where you have superficial the trope of diversity versus what real diversity is. Childhood versus what real childhood is. Boredom, what is real boredom? So everywhere, and that is why it is so difficult to grasp these ideas, but these are all interconnected ideas.
So coming back to the point that we discussed in introduction itself, is diversity worth a goal to pursue? Because when the policymakers will frame policy or the laws, their emphasis, even in case of representation, in case of political representation, or in case of what should be the uh, number of children who should be admitted in a certain course or in colleges, everything is on the foundation of diversity. And we want to ensure that people from different background, irrespective of differences, can come to a similar place and achieve higher goals in life.
Right. Others, you might recall that you had also done in the first season where you would do a monologue on the as a book reviews. You had covered a book called Stumbling Upon Happiness.
Right.
So I can clearly make that connection with happiness itself. Diversity cannot be pursued as a goal, just like happiness cannot be pursued
as a goal.
Diversity is an outcome of the way in which human beings live on the earth, how much respect they have for their environment, how they deal with the sacred, and how they handle boredom. Right, that comes from those choices only. The meritocratic ideal of being part of this global race for more and more efficiency, productivity, and profit will inevitably destroy civilization. And the question is whether the human civilization, I'm talking about the whole human race, whether there will be an answer in time, or whether there will be a course correction in time for us to live in ways which are closer to nature and closer to the demands of the, let's say, dharma. I think that much is fairly safe to say. What that entails, the fine print is, of course, the devil lies in the details. But this statement is quite safe to make, that we'll have to course correct. And only then will diversity flourish. There is no doubt about the fact that diversity is very, very desirable, just like happiness. But the American ideal of pursuit of happiness is as stupid as the ideal of pursuit of diversity.
But the point will come is that what should the, let's say, government, when I'm talking about government, because that's the only power that has any authority, because there's no community in the modern world which can assert itself and implement certain laws or anything. The ability to push people towards certain direction is what only a government or a power like that has. So if what they are doing with reservations and other, as I mentioned previously also, is that they are pushing towards that only. So I believe in that case we have no reason to oppose them.
They're pushing towards what?
Like for a fair representation of people.
No, that's what I'm saying. The fair representation of people is like pursuing diversity as a symptom.
Right.
Diversity is an outcome, is a byproduct of organizing yourself in a certain way. If you pursue it as an outcome directly, you go head on like you pursue happiness, then you will never find it, because it is elusive. It is not going to happen like that. So when the government makes these policies and says, or the corporations do it and say that we need diversity, what is that?
Hiring.
Diversity hiring, diversity indices, all those things that they measure diversity with. At best, they are just superficial exercises, and at worst, they are exercises of self-deception, because that is not real diversity. That does not give them any new, ways of thinking about.
Right. Because the point will come is that if they don't even do that, then the people who are marginalized, the people who are have-nots, will remain so in their condition. The condition won't improve.
Yes, so we go back to the whole idea of merit and meritocracy again, where meritocracy is not the solution for inequity, it is an excuse for it. Similarly, here also, this is not a solution for diversity.
It's an excuse.
This is an excuse that we are doing our best, but it is not going to happen.
Correct.
Because that's not what diversity really is, and it's very difficult to explain. So I would urge the viewers to have a read of this book, though it's it's interesting in parts, it's quite breezy in parts, but in certain parts it becomes very dense.
Correct.
Because he's quoting so many scholars and so many authors. But it's certainly worth it, and from a reading of this, you get a sense of how entangled this idea is with everything else around us, and we cannot just pick and choose, take diversity out and just pursue that. It is not going to happen.
Correct. Thank you, viewers, for watching. We'll see you again in the next episode of Bookmark, where we'll be discussing the book Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert. Till then, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.